Imagine being a 12-year-old black boy, and your own teacher looks you in the eye and says, "You don't belong here." Years later, that same boy walks back into the same school, not as a student, but as the principal. This is not just a story. It's a comeback the world needs to hear. If you're ready to see how one person turned pain into power, hit that subscribe button and join us for more incredible journeys. You won't want to miss what happens next. You don't belong here. People like you don't make it far anyway. Those hateful words didn't come from a bully on the playground or a stranger on the street. They came from a teacher. The one person in a school who should be a shield, a guide, someone who lifts children up, not crushes them down. The entire classroom froze, and time stood still. 12-year-old Marcus Bell sat frozen in his chair, eyes wide, lips sealed, heart pounding so loud he could barely hear. It was just a regular Tuesday morning math class at Jefferson Middle School, and Marcus had simply asked a question. He wanted to understand the lesson better. But instead of an explanation, he got humiliation. The classroom fell into an eerie silence. 20-something students looked on, but none of them said a word. Not one voice rose to defend him. Not one hand raised to object. And from outside the door the principal had passed by moments earlier, peeking in briefly and walking on without concern, as if it were just another day. That moment, that chilling silence, sank deep into Marcus's soul. He felt the sting not just in his skin but in his heart, as if the very idea of who he was had been dragged into question. He stared down at his desk, his books blurry through the tears he refused to let fall. Something inside him cracked, but something else, something unbreakable, quietly began to form. Marcus had always known that things were different for him. He had noticed how other kids were praised more, called on more, how their mistakes were forgiven, how they got the benefit of the doubt. But this was the first time racism had smacked him in the face like a brick wall. And it came not from a stranger, but from the very institution that was supposed to build him. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know what he could say. He just sat there, quietly absorbing it all, feeling the heat of 100 eyes and the cold bite of shame that didn't belong to him. When the bell rang, he stayed seated. He didn't want to walk out into the hallway. He didn't want to meet the eyes of classmates who had become strangers in that single moment. That night, Marcus sat across from his mother at the small kitchen table, pushing dinner around his plate. He didn't want to talk, but she knew. She always knew. She asked gently, and he broke. Tears flowing, words stumbling out between gasps. He told her everything, every word, every look, every feeling. She didn't cry, she didn't yell. She just reached out, took his trembling hand in hers, and said something he would carry for the rest of his life. Don't ever let someone make you feel small just because they can't see your greatness. You are not what they say you are. You are what you believe you are. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He stared at the ceiling, replaying the day over and over, but with a new voice echoing in his mind. His mother's voice. And from that night forward, something began to change. He started to read more. Not just his school books, but stories of people who had been told no and still found their way to yes. People like him. He wrote in journals, set goals, and studied harder than ever. But it wasn't easy. Every day in that classroom felt like walking back into a battlefield. The teacher, Mr. Harlan, continued with his quiet jabs, veiled insults dressed up as sarcasm, cold stares, the refusal to acknowledge Marcus's effort. But Marcus no longer responded with silence rooted in fear. He began to hold his head higher, to answer questions louder, and to refuse to shrink. He told himself, "I'll outwork this man. I'll outlast this man. One day, he'll have no choice but to see me." But Mr. Harlan never did. He never apologized, never admitted the wrong. He left the school 2 years later, taking his prejudice with him. But Marcus stayed, stronger and sharper, his fire growing. He entered high school with a point to prove, not just to Mr. Harlan, but to himself. He studied late into the night, made honor roll and joined the debate team, where he learned to turn his words into weapons, not to harm but to defend, to uplift, to challenge. He mentored younger black students who faced similar struggles, quietly becoming the role model he had once needed. And he never forgot that moment in 7th grade. He used it. It became the reason he chose to study education in college. He wanted to become the teacher he never had, the one who sees students, really sees them, and makes them feel like they matter. His professors noticed something special in him, not just intelligence, but heart, purpose. After graduation, he returned to his city and began teaching at a public high school not far from Jefferson Middle. The kids there had stories like his. Some were angry, some had already given up, but Marcus looked them in the eyes and said, "I've been where you are, and I'm telling you, you can make it." They believed him because he was living proof. He poured his soul into his work, staying late, visiting students' homes, organizing after-school programs. Over time, his reputation grew. Students respected him, parents thanked him, and the school board took notice. He moved from teacher to counselor, then earned his master's in educational leadership. And one spring afternoon, as he scrolled through job postings, one name stopped him cold: Principal, Jefferson Middle School. He stared at the screen, heart pounding. That place, that classroom, that moment. It all came rushing back. He thought about it for days, then applied. Weeks later, his phone rang. The voice on the other end said, "Mr. Bell, we'd be honored to have you lead Jefferson Middle." He hung up the phone and sat in silence. He had done it. He had come, full circle. On his first day as principal, Marcus walked those halls like a man reclaiming his past. The walls were painted new colors. The lockers were different. But the ghosts were still there. He walked into room 107, the very classroom where his story had begun. The desk arrangement had changed, but in his mind, he could still see 12-year-old Marcus sitting in that third seat from the left, trying not to cry. And then he smiled, because that boy had not been destroyed. He had risen, and now he stood not as a victim, but as a leader. That year, Marcus transformed Jefferson Middle from a place of survival into a place of growth. He implemented training for staff to address unconscious bias, started a mentorship program pairing students with community leaders, and personally met with every struggling student. When asked why he worked so hard, he simply said, "Because I know what it feels like to be invisible, and I won't let that happen on my watch." In one school assembly, a student asked, "Mr. Bell, what made you want to come back here?" Marcus paused, looked out at the sea of young faces, and answered, "Because once upon a time, someone told me I didn't belong in this school, so I came back to make sure every one of you knows that you do." And in that moment, Marcus Bell didn't just rewrite his own story, he changed the ending for everyone else too. After that day, the world Marcus once knew, the hallways he walked, the classrooms he sat in, the teachers he once looked up to, all of it turned cold and unfamiliar, like stepping into a storm without shelter. School no longer felt like a place of learning. It felt like a minefield, every step filled with dread, every morning a mental battle just to get out of bed. The laughter in the cafeteria sounded distant, the smiles from classmates seemed insincere, and Marcus began to shrink into himself, not out of shyness but survival. The sting of those cruel words from Mr. Harlan didn't fade after one day. They echoed for weeks, then months, carving invisible scars into Marcus's confidence. "You don't belong here," replayed in his mind like a broken record, and soon he began to wonder if it was true. His test scores dropped not because he couldn't learn, but because he started believing he wasn't capable. His hand no longer shot up in class. He stopped turning in extra credit. He avoided eye contact, walking the halls with his head down, trying to be invisible because being noticed meant being targeted. And Mr. Harlan didn't stop. He was never loud with his hate again, but his poison came in whispers. A sarcastic chuckle when Marcus got an answer wrong, a comment like, "Why am I not surprised?" When Marcus turned in work a day late, or the tired, dismissive, "You people never learn," muttered just loud enough for Marcus to hear. Each time, it felt like a punch to the gut, but worse than the words was the silence. Other teachers turned a blind eye. Some of them even laughed. The system that was supposed to protect students like Marcus was broken, and he was left to navigate it alone. Or so he thought. At home, his mother began to notice. She saw how her once joyful, curious son now came home quiet, withdrawn, retreating to his room with no appetite and no stories about his day. She worked 2 jobs and barely had time to sleep, but she always had time for Marcus. One evening, she gently knocked on his bedroom door. No answer. She came in anyway and sat on the edge of his bed. Without a word, she reached for his hand. It was trembling. That's when he broke. He didn't want to cry. But the tears poured out, hot, frustrated, defeated. Through choked sobs and broken sentences, he told her everything. The insults, the embarrassment, the fear, the shame, and worst of all, the growing belief that maybe Mr. Harlan was right. That maybe he really wasn't good enough. His mother didn't cry. She didn't shout. She listened. And when Marcus had said all he could say, she cupped his face in her tired hands and looked him in the eyes with a strength that could only come from surviving pain of her own. Listen to me, Marcus. You are not what that man says you are. You are brilliant. You are capable. You are destined for more than he could ever understand. And one day, you're going to walk back into that school, not as a boy trying to prove his worth, but as a man who knows it. She didn't just speak hope into him, she poured it like water into a dry seed. That night, Marcus lay in bed staring at the ceiling, and though the sting of humiliation still pulsed in his chest, something new began to grow, a quiet fire. He didn't know exactly how, and he didn't know when, but he made a vow to himself, in that dark room, I will rise. He began to see every cruel comment not as a nail in his coffin, but as a brick in his foundation. The next day at school, his walk was still hesitant, but his shoulders were a little straighter. He still didn't raise his hand, but he took better notes. At lunch, he sat alone, but he began reading books his mother brought home from second-hand stores. Books about heroes, inventors, leaders who looked like him and faced worse. He read about people who were told no again and again, only to one day be the ones writing the rules. He started journaling, at first just angry thoughts, scribbles of frustration. But over time, those pages filled with goals, plans, dreams. He began to work harder, not to prove himself to Mr. Harlan, but to make good on the promise he whispered to himself that night. The teacher's voice became background noise. The silence from others no longer felt like a verdict. It became motivation. He told himself, they don't believe in me now, but one day they'll have no choice. Quietly, he rebuilt himself. Not overnight, but brick by brick, test by test, challenge by challenge. He joined after-school clubs not to fit in, but to grow. He volunteered to help other students with their assignments, slowly discovering a passion for teaching and leading. He started winning awards, small at first, then bigger. His name was finally being spoken not in mockery but with respect. Still, he never forgot. That memory lived inside him, not as a wound but as a spark. He knew the pain of being unseen, of being dismissed, and he never wanted another student to feel it. That's when the dream started taking shape. Not just to succeed, but to return, to stand in the same halls that once tried to break him and show them who he had become. That was the promise he made to himself. That was the fire that never went out. And every day, with every step forward, Marcus Bell moved closer to the moment where his past would become his greatest power. High school arrived like a new chapter, but for Marcus Bell it wasn't a clean slate. The scars of middle school still clung to him, invisible to most, but heavy in his heart. The memory of that classroom, that teacher, and that devastating moment still echoed in his mind, but now it didn't crush him. It drove him. Every time a teacher skipped over his raised hand or mispronounced his name without trying to learn it, he remembered Mr. Harlan. But Marcus had changed. He was no longer the quiet, confused boy who sat frozen in shame. He had grown stronger, smarter, more aware. He had learned that his anger didn't have to explode. It could be sharpened, aimed, transformed. So instead of acting out, he acted up, not in rebellion, but in resilience. while other students were out at parties or wasting time after school. Marcus was in the library flipping through textbooks, taking notes like his life depended on it, because in a way, it did. He saw education not just as a requirement, but as a weapon, a tool to break through the walls people like Mr. Harlan tried to build around kids like him. He joined the debate team, nervous at first, stumbling through his words, but determined to learn. And with every speech, every rebuttal, he found his voice. He spoke not just with confidence, but with conviction, about injustice, leadership, unity, and what it meant to be seen. Soon, his words began to carry weight. He started mentoring younger students, especially the ones who sat quietly in the back, the way he used to, afraid to speak up. He saw pieces of himself in them, and he wanted to be the person he had once needed, someone who believed in them, someone who told them they mattered. Teachers began to take notice, but Marcus didn't seek their approval anymore. He had already found his purpose. His grades were exceptional, his attendance perfect, and his recommendations glowing. He applied to college with one mission in mind, not to escape the past, but to return stronger. When he got the scholarship letter from a respected university, he held it in his hands like a trophy, not just for himself, but for every moment he wanted to quit and didn't. At college, he majored in education. Some people asked why. Why not business or law or something with more money? But Marcus knew. Deep down, he knew that the classroom was where he was broken, and it was where he would build. He wanted to become the kind of teacher who could change lives, not with power, but with presence. He sat in lecture halls learning about curriculum and pedagogy, but in his heart, he never stopped seeing that 7th grade classroom, that twisted smirk on Mr. Harlan's face, and that suffocating silence. It never faded. He didn't want it to. Because that memory was no longer a chain, it was his fuel. Every paper he wrote, every night he stayed up studying, every internship he took, it was all for that one goal, to become the teacher he never had. He thought, if one bad teacher could wound a child so deeply that it haunted him for years, imagine what one good teacher could do. That thought never left him. It wasn't about revenge, it was about redemption. Not just for himself, but for every student who had ever been told they didn't belong. He wanted to be the reason they believed they did. And so Marcus pressed on, with a heart full of fire and a vision bigger than any one classroom. He wasn't chasing success. He was chasing impact. And every step he took brought him closer to turning his deepest pain into his greatest purpose. Years slipped by, and with them came both battles and breakthroughs. But Marcus Bell never let go of the promise he made to himself in that dark bedroom as a child, to rise and to return stronger. After graduating from college with honors, he began his career as a teacher in an underfunded school not far from where he had grown up. And from the moment he stepped into that first classroom as Mr. Bell, everything changed. He wasn't just there to teach math or history. He was there to teach hope, to restore dignity, to be the kind of adult he never had in his corner. He recognized the signs instantly, the quiet kids with lowered heads, the smart ones who acted out because they were never challenged, the angry ones who weren't angry but just tired of not being heard. He saw them because he was them. And he didn't just teach, he listened. He stayed after class for the kid who just needed a break, made phone calls home not to scold but to understand, and reminded every student, black, brown, poor, struggling, that their story wasn't over just because someone else said it was. His classroom became a safe haven, his voice a beacon. Year after year, his students didn't just pass, they soared. Word spread. He was promoted to school counselor, where he could reach even more kids. Now, his role wasn't just about test scores, but about emotional survival. He led anti-racism workshops, started mentorship programs, and helped implement school-wide policies that protected marginalized students. He earned his master's in educational leadership while working full-time, studying late into the night after long days of pouring his heart into every hallway he walked. He never complained. Every degree, every promotion, every milestone was a brick in the road back to that moment, the one that shaped him, And then, one morning over coffee, a job listing popped up on his screen. Principal, Jefferson Middle School. His heart stopped. Jefferson. That Jefferson. The school that had once left him in pieces. The hallways where he had once been made to feel invisible. The same building where a teacher had nearly destroyed his belief in himself. Now, the same school was calling for a new leader, and Marcus knew. This wasn't a coincidence. This was the circle completing itself. He stared at the screen for a long time, his hands trembling slightly. Then he clicked, apply. He didn't fill out that application with bitterness, but with purpose. He didn't see it as a chance for revenge. He saw it as an opportunity to rewrite the legacy of that place, to make sure no child ever felt what he had felt. Weeks passed, interviews came and went. Then one afternoon, his phone rang. Mr. Bell, congratulations. We'd like to welcome you as the new principal of Jefferson Middle. The voice on the other end was calm and professional, but Marcus's heart thundered like a drum. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. Just a stunned silence, followed by a slow, unstoppable flow of tears. He hung up the phone and sat there alone, staring out the window, letting the weight of that moment wash over him. These weren't tears of sadness or even pride. They were tears of victory, of survival, of knowing that he had done what once felt impossible. He hadn't just come back. He had come back as the leader, the decision-maker, the protector. He had walked back into the building that once made him feel worthless, not to relive that pain, but to transform it. He stood taller now. He was no longer that trembling boy in the back row. He was Principal Marcus Bell. And every child who walked through those doors would see in him what he once needed to see. Someone who believed, someone who cared, someone who understood. And in that full circle moment, as he prepared to step once again into those familiar hallways, he didn't feel anger. He felt peace, because now he was finally where he was always meant to be. On his first day as principal of Jefferson Middle School, Marcus Bell walked the halls with a quiet intensity, every step echoing with memories of who he once was and everything he had endured between these walls. The familiar scent of floor, polish, the clanging of lockers, the distant sound of laughter. It all pulled him back to the scared, silenced boy who once sat in room 204, humiliated and helpless. But Marcus didn't let those ghosts haunt him. He let them guide him. He moved slowly through each corridor, not with dread, but with reverence. Each classroom he passed held more than just desks and whiteboards. They held fragments of a past that shaped him. Finally, he stopped in front of one room, the room where it had all begun. He turned the handle and stepped inside. It looked different now, brighter, updated, filled with new faces and new energy. But Marcus saw through time. He could still picture the exact spot he had once sat in, the window he used to stare out of, praying for the bell to ring so he could escape. The judgment, the fear, the loneliness. But now, he wasn't that boy. He wasn't the outsider. He was the principal, the leader, the guardian, the one who would make sure no child ever felt the way he did. That first day, he didn't just set up his office or go over schedules. He started a mission. He met with every teacher, not just to learn their names, but to understand their hearts. He shared his story, not to shame, but to inspire. He told them that behind every difficult student might be a silent struggle, behind every outburst a plea to be seen. He trained staff on unconscious bias, cultural awareness, and trauma-informed teaching. He encouraged open discussions, safe spaces, and new ideas. He launched diversity and inclusion programs, brought in speakers who looked like the students, and created mentorship groups where older kids guided the younger ones. He didn't want to just run a school. He wanted to build a sanctuary, one where every child, regardless of background, race, or ability, could walk in and feel, I belong here. The students noticed immediately. Mr. Bell wasn't like other principals. He didn't just sit behind a desk. He walked the halls every morning, giving fist bumps and words of encouragement. He knew names. He asked questions and listened to the answers. Parents noticed too. He showed up at community meetings, visited homes when needed, and made it clear that he was invested, not just in grades, but in lives. The atmosphere of the school began to shift. Suspensions went down, engagement went up. The walls of Jefferson Middle, once cold and heavy with silent pain, now pulsed with life and light. And still, through it all, Marcus carried that quiet fire inside him, the promise he'd once made as a child. He hadn't returned to erase the past, but to rewrite the future. Then one day, during a school assembly packed with chattering students and proud staff, a hand shot up in the crowd. A young boy, about the same age Marcus had been when it all started, asked a simple but powerful question. "Mr. Bell, why did you become a principal?" The room went still. Marcus took a breath, his eyes scanning the sea of faces, each one full of potential, full of hope. He smiled gently and replied, "Because someone once told me I didn't belong in this school, so I came back to make sure every student here knows they do." The room erupted in applause, but Marcus didn't hear it as noise. He heard it as a heartbeat, the pulse of something greater than himself. He had turned pain into power, hurt into healing, and rejection into a revolution. In that moment, surrounded by the very students he had vowed to protect, he knew he had not just returned, he had arrived. Marcus Bell's journey shows us that no matter how hard life may knock you down, your story is far from over. From being told he didn't belong to standing as the principal of the same school that once broke him, Marcus proves that resilience, determination, and a heart full of purpose can rewrite any narrative. If you're inspired by his incredible transformation and believe in the power of turning pain into purpose, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Stay tuned for more stories that will remind you, no matter where you start, you can always rise.